Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Infinite Learning's webinar today. My name is Rebecca Anand. I'm the Managing Partner and Co-Founder of Infinite Learning. We are delighted to be running today's webinar in partnership with Amanda King. And today she's going to speak about phonics and spelling. Now, Amanda's developed this webinar as an introduction to our forthcoming virtual courses of the same name, which will run separately. And we're delighted to welcome her to talk about a focus on phonics and a boost for spelling. The webinar is going to explore some of the reasons why reading and spelling in English is tricky and how a structured approach can support learning and teaching. It details the aims of the courses that are coming up and what participants can expect to gain. It's also going to offer a sample of one of the activities that will be shared. So this is really aimed obviously at primary leaders, teachers and teaching assistants. Now, before I hand over to Amanda, just a few small areas of housekeeping. At the moment, as attendees, you are on automatically on listen-only mode. What we're going to do is allow Amanda to deliver her presentation in full, and then we'll have a live question and answer session at the end. However, as we go along, if any questions spring to mind, you'll see in the control box, your control panel there, that you'll have a chat area. If you've got any questions at all, please do enter those and we can address those at the end once Amanda has finished the presentation. You will receive a video recording of this webinar tomorrow at 5 o'clock, so it comes up 24 hours after the end of the webinar. And immediately after the session, we will email you with details of the courses that are coming up, and also a PDF of today's PowerPoint. Also tomorrow, with your recording, you will be sent a certificate of attendance. Okay, I think that's everything from me for now. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Amanda King. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be back in Dubai, albeit virtually. Let's get going, shall we? So this session is, as Rebecca quite rightly says, about teaching phonics and spelling effectively, and it's linked with the English National Curriculum. Now, as Rebecca says, and I hope she's going to rein me in, I get a little bit passionate about all of this because spelling does have a reputation in English for being very tricky. So, and the other thing is, of course, with the modern technologies that we have, and with all the disputes there are around the teaching and learning of phonics and spelling, is it relevant when we come to reading and writing in English? Should the English National Curriculum place this massive emphasis on it? English is, I tend to call it a mongrel language. It's made up of Germanic languages, the Romance languages, Italian and French. We've got Latin influences, we've got Greek influences. And this has all happened because centuries ago we were being invaded a lot before we had a really well-established language, and certainly before we had a written code. So it appears very chaotic. When you add into that we were a trading nation, so when we went abroad, we would bring back goods, but we would also bring back words, and we would slot them into our language with very little consideration of whether we should alter the spelling from the language that we got it from. So this complicates our language quite a lot. It makes English a very expressive language. It makes English a very exciting language, but it does give us complications when it comes to reading and spelling, because, as it says on this slide, we don't have this straightforward system of sound to letter correspondence in the way that many other languages do. added to that, over the centuries, our pronunciation of words has changed. We had what was called the Great Vowel Shift a few centuries ago, which means that some of the vowels that we pronounce now are different, or we're pronouncing sounds differently from the way that we did a few centuries ago, but we didn't change the spelling. Again, also over time, we've altered the way that we pronounce some words. So we've ended up with some silent letters, for example. And then, well, I could go on about this. I get a little bit passionate about it, as I say, but you know, when you add into that all the delights that happened when the printing press came to Britain, you know, it has complicated things somewhat. But I'm going to quote my guru, Professor David Crystal, who says, English appears to be chaotic, but it only appears to be chaotic. There are systems, there are patterns that we can apply. So as long as we work at it, as long as we embrace its exciting exceptions, there are things that we can do to support children to become good readers and good spellers using their phonic and their spelling knowledge. And just a little word about spell checkers, because this is one of the things that people keep telling me, is that you know, I don't need to learn to spell because my computer will do it for me. I've got a spell checker. But as you all will have encountered over time, spell checkers really only help you if you know how to spell in the first place. They will help you to sort out the idiosyncrasies of certain words, but they will not help you if you don't know how to spell that word at all. And spell checkers don't really recognise homophones either, so it won't recognise the difference between no, N-O, and no, K-N-O-W. So they have a limited application at the moment. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But at the moment, there is no doubt about it. We need to work with our children to support their knowledge of phonics and spelling in order to give them the best possible chance to read and spell effectively in English. So I'm going to start by giving you a bit of a challenge. Now, I can't hear you and I can't see you, but I'm going to give you a moment or two to read that word. Now, I promise you it is a real word, and it's that's what it means, the estimation of something as worthless. Now, I can't see you, I can't hear you, I can't chat with you, but I'm going to assume that the way you tackled that word was to start at the beginning and to work your way through it bit by bit until you got to the end. Now, as experienced language users, in reality, we're very good once we've grasped the basics of language. We're very good at quickly scanning a whole word and picking out bits. For example, the cation bit at the end, where we think we'll be all right once we get there. We're also good as experienced language users of picking out little bits. There's in, for example. Oh, look, and there it is again. That we can hook onto. But our youngest children don't have that. They don't have that language experience. They don't have the vocabulary. They don't have the life experience. So we need to teach them to start here and build this word sound by sound in order to read it. And we start obviously in English from left to right. Okay. So even though you're experienced language users, even though you will have picked out bits that you recognise, even though you would have gone to the end and gone, I'll be okay once I get to the cation bit, you still probably used a phonic approach to tackle a word that's not in your day-to-day vocabulary, or at least I hope it isn't. There's only one person I know who's used this word, and he was a pompous so-and-so, so we won't dwell on him. Are you waiting for me? I wonder if you're waiting for me to read it for you. Let's have a go. It's floxenorsin nihilipilification. Floxenorsin nihilipilification. Now, actually, it behaves itself quite well phonically, even though it's a really long word. Flock. Now, the first time we get an anomaly is here with this C, because the C is followed by an I. It's soft. Flock. Sin. Here's the or as in autumn. Floxenor. Here's the sin again. Floxenor sin ilip if a, and then we've got shun at the end here, which isn't particularly phonic until we know that there are lots of other words that end in that same pattern. So phonics actually helps us a long way with our reading. Okay, let's have a look at spelling something now. Now, the word I would like you to have a go at spelling, and again, I don't know whether you're going to do this, but give it a go, is absquatulate. There's a word to conjure with. Absquatulate. I'll just say it again, just in case you didn't hear it quite. Absquatulate. Now, assuming you've had a go at that, how did you do it? What processes did you go through? Now, the chances are you started at the beginning with the ab, and then you went to the squat, you, late. So you would have probably split it into syllables. Again, you can do that because you're experienced language users. You probably also made use of words that are already in your vocabulary. So, for example, squat. It's quite possible that you spelt that S-Q-U-A-T because you know how to spell squat. I'm sure you spelt the late bit L-A-T-E. So you made use of something that we call analytical phonics. In other words, you made use of words that you already know, and you used the sounds of those words to inform you about the way that this word is spelt. But you probably, even if you used that strategy, you still started at the beginning and worked your way through the word bit by bit using the phoneme grapheme correspondences that you know, the sounds linked with the letters, to have a go at this word that is probably not in your day-to-day vocabulary. It is a real word, and it means to leave a place very quickly and without warning, which I hope you're not going to do right now. Here's the spelling of the word. I wonder if you got it right. You probably did, or if you didn't, you weren't far out. And at the very least, you came up with something that was what we call phonically plausible. Now, spelling, as David Crystal says, is not chaotic, but it isn't easy in English. And even the very, very best spellers struggle to spell every single word correctly because of the nature of our language. So sometimes phonically plausible is as good as it gets. However, we cannot rely on phonics alone. We have to give phonics a start to our children as a starting point. So this has to be our default starting point, and that is synthetic phonics. Synthetic phonics is building a word bit by bit all the way through to read and to spell. And then once children have got a good handle on synthetic phonics, then we can build in the rules. So let's just apply a rule now to have another go at this word. I would like you to change absquatulate into absquatulating. Now, the chances are that you know your spelling rules, and you know that if you want to add a suffix ing to a verb that ends in an E, you have to remove the E. So the first part of the word would be exactly the same, absquatulate, and then you change the E into an I and add NG. Now that's because you know rules. Once children have got a grasp of phonics, we can take them on to learning rules. Okay, well done for having a go at that if you did. But this is what we've been doing. Phonics, the skill of segmentation and blending. So segmenting to spell a word and blending to read a word together with the knowledge of the alphabetic code. Now it says alphabetic code and not alphabet because we have in English 26 letters in our alphabet, but we have 44 spoken phonemes. So that means that we need to use some letters in combination. These are our digraphs and trigraphs and tetragraphs to spell the sounds that we don't have represented by single letters. And as I mentioned before, we have the added complication of having pinched words from other languages which have slightly more unusual spelling patterns, and that adds to the complexity of the different letter combinations that we have. But phonics basically are those two things: blending and segmenting, and making use of the knowledge of our alphabetic code, our extended alphabetic code. Now, even though it is tricky in English to read and write, phonics is incredibly important because it supports children to word decode accurately. And perhaps more importantly, it's developing their ability to do that independently. If we don't teach children how words work in English, how the sounds link with the letters, they are dependent upon us to tell them what every single word says. And even with a sight vocabulary of 1,000 words, we can't really tackle more than the basic texts. So it's really important that they learn how to take words apart and build them back up again. And as I've mentioned, we need them to get over the worries about the trickiness of English, and at least as a starting point, make plausible attempts at words. Otherwise, they will, in their writing, default to words they know how to spell. So they won't write marvellous, they'll write good. They won't write disheartened, they'll write sad. And it's going to take away from their creativity. Once we have given our children a good grasp of phonics, then we can build on that knowledge of phonology to tackle the complexities of English. And this means that we need to teach them morphology. That means how words are built with starting with a root word and adding on prefixes and suffixes. So morphology, units of meaning to build words. Etymology, because as I mentioned, we've taken lots of words from all over the world. So sometimes understanding where those words have come from help us to understand how to spell them. And that last one I've already mentioned, analogy, is when we make use of words that we already know to help us to build that knowledge and understanding of how to try out words for ourselves. Now, because English is complex, we cannot rely on what would perhaps be a traditional method of turning our lovely language into lists of words for the children to take home and spell. And as you can see from this slide, if we do that, if we work on 10 words a week when they're in school and only that method, in theory, it's going to take children 1,315 years to learn how to spell. And that's really not practical. Now, I'm not saying that you should never send lists of words home. I'm just saying it's not the most efficient method for teaching spelling. We need to teach them in a way that will help them understand how words are built so that they can apply that knowledge to build their understanding and their repertoire of words. So this brings me to the content of the courses. So those of you who are interested in the Focus on Phonics course, this looks at the statutory requirements for phonics in our current English National Curriculum and the implications for learning and teaching, because when we look at that curriculum, it looks pretty scary. It moves very fast. There is an expectation that children will acquire the majority of their phonic knowledge by the time they finish in year 2. Now, the reality is phonics spreads all the way through the language curriculum in English, right up to the end of year 6, but the majority of it is tackled in year 1 and 2. That's because we need children to learn to read quickly. The mantra is learn to read in order to read to learn. So they're doing a lot of their learning to read in Key Stage 1, so they're reading to learn in Key Stage 2. So it moves really fast. We will also look at subject knowledge because there is a lot of confusion out there about what the different terms of phonics means. Also, it's important that we're all on the same page when it comes to articulating letter sounds correctly without that schwa, that sound at the end. We'll also look at what effective phonics teaching actually looks like. So we'll look at a teaching sequence, but we'll also look at how we spread that learning out through the day, because children are very good at compartmentalizing their learning. I've done my phonics and now I'm doing my reading, and it's as if the two had no link in their heads. So we need to make those links for them. And then finally, we will do lots of games and activities for enlivening the lessons and making them engaging and interesting for the children, so that we keep their attention and build this independent understanding. When it comes to the Boost for Spelling course, we're going to do similar things. We're going to look at the content. We're going to look at the implications for teaching and learning. And again, we'll also look at some of the terminology and sort some of that out. And then we'll look at the strategies and activities for developing the effective spelling program. I have to say, I think the teaching of spelling is still a little bit of a Cinderella. We are very good now on the whole at teaching phonics, but we don't always have that structured program of spelling to go on to once the children have acquired their phonic knowledge. And it's still, in too many schools, as far as I'm concerned, defaults to just sending home a spelling list, which, as I've already mentioned, is not the most efficient way of helping the children through this complexity. What can you expect from both courses? Well, first and foremost, I want to build your confidence. Lots of people come to me and they say, oh, I'm not an expert in phonics. Oh, I'm not very good at spelling myself. I'm dyslexic. I've got problems. I take all of that. I understand all of that. But we can learn. We can learn alongside the children, apart from anything else, as long as we've got the confidence to know that how we're interpreting these curricula is correct. I will give you a repertoire of strategies, activities and games. You'll get some of them on the course, and then I'll also provide you with some further ideas electronically so that you can take those away and try them out. There will be gaps, so we'll do some teaching sessions, and then you'll have a gap to take away and go and try things out in your own settings, and then come back and share how you got on and what the problems were and can we resolve some of those problems. And then we'll look also at how we can support children to apply that knowledge, because again, as we all know, we can teach children how to spell, but getting them to use that knowledge is another ball game. So I just thought I'd finish this little introduction with a sample of one of the activities that I can supply you with. This works rather like a word wheel. You often see these in puzzle books or newspapers, but they are in a circle. I'm afraid my technology doesn't allow me. I'm not clever enough to make this into a circle, but I'm sure that you understand the principle. You must use the sound in the middle. So here we've got a grapheme for the phoneme A. And around the edge, you've got various other letters that you can employ to make words of 3, 4 or more letters. Now, unlike word wheels and newspapers, you can use these letters as many times as you like in the same word. So, for example, you could make the word tray or trait, T-R-A-T. But you must use the digraph A in every word. And I'm going to give you, you're grown-ups, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to see how many you can make. Okay, so I'm going to not talk for 30 seconds and see how many of those words you can make. You can't see, but I've got a timer here. Okay, time up. Time up. Now, I wonder how many words you managed to make. Now, what I would do in the classroom is I'd probably start by saying, did anybody make more than 5, more than 10? And we'd isolate, or we'd find out the children who made the longest list. And then, of course, we'd check to make sure they had actually spelt them correctly. And then while they're preening themselves that they've got the longest list, I'll then say, who made the longest word? Because one of the things we really need to establish is that we can make words that are longer than 4 letters, 5 letters. For example, you could make the word from this set of letters, you can make the word entertainment. You could make the word straightened, and so on. So it's quite a good activity for differentiation, because you can really encourage the children to make very long words, or they can stick with short words and just use their knowledge of phonics to make lots. So they can make rain and train and again and so on and so forth. So activities like these can be part of your practice, part of the teaching sequence for phonics. They can be warm-up activities in spelling, they can be early work, it could be a homework activity, and you could encourage the children to find some words and then find their meanings. It could also be a little bit of a competition at the end of a day. It can be revision work for a sound that you haven't touched for a while. There are all kinds of ways that we can use this kind of an activity, and hopefully it's a little bit of fun. So I'm just now going to hand back to Rebecca and invite you to ask any questions that might have occurred to you while I've been talking. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it's given you a little bit of an insight as to what to expect if you join our course in January. Okay, Rebecca?
Yes, Mandy, thank you so much. That was actually fascinating. Some of the history there of how our language has evolved, and obviously you're passionate about it, which is wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see. I found it really interesting as well, the concept that we can learn with our students. Obviously, that's very close to our hearts as an organisation, Infinite Learning. We continue to grow, and I reflected there on my own understanding of language. You certainly had me engaged with some of those little questions about pronunciation of words and spelling of words. And it's interesting because I have a really good sense of grammar, but that's not through having been taught well at school in English. It's because I studied languages, because I was a language teacher. So my understanding of grammar has come from that perspective, and I know how to spell things, but I don't know how I know how, if that makes sense. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think, one of the things we really want to do, of course, we're running these courses to help improve student learning outcomes, but how will we do that? We'll do that through improving teacher confidence and skill sets, and I certainly felt if I was going on this course, I'd be in very, very safe hands. So not only was it engaging and interesting, but it was reassuring, I think, as well, and confidence boosting. So thank you so much, and just a little taste of some of the kinds of activities that our participants could expect to find were they to join the programme. Now, I'm just going to have a very quick look here for questions, but there were a couple of issues with audio for one or two, but that was all in terms of issues there. Let me see if there's anything else here. Oh yes, we've got lots of comments on, actually people were submitting their suggestions for words from the wheel, said, train, drain, gain. So everyone was joining in there, which is great. Now, no questions as yet, so I'm going to just continue with a little bit of follow-up information, and let's see if any more questions come in during that time. So yes, if you don't think of any questions now but have some later on, please do let us know, get in touch with myself, and we can forward that to Amanda. And just a reminder that the video recording will be shared with you tomorrow along with a certificate, but you'll get a PowerPoint from today's presentation very soon after this webinar. There's also a little survey, some feedback that we ask for in tomorrow's email, I believe, so please do share that with us. It's always very, very welcome. The webinars are relatively new. We've actually been doing them since August now, so not so new anymore, but we do find they're a nice introduction to courses that are coming up. And on that note, please do go visit our website for further details on those two courses. The first one, a focus on phonics, delivering and supporting phonics in the English National Curriculum, and the other one, a boost for spelling, delivering spelling in the national curriculum. And those cohorts start from mid-January, so do go have a look on our website under e-learning. You'll see the virtual courses, and they're listed under primary literacy. The direct link will be provided in the email that will follow up. If you enjoyed this webinar and you'd like a little bit more of Amanda King, then our next webinar is taking place on Wednesday, the 18th of November, same time, 4 o'clock, and that one is going to focus on achieving greater depth in writing in primary school. The course is actually going to be divided into different key stages, but for the purposes of the webinar, it will give you an overview of what you can expect there. Let me just check again to see if we have any questions that have come in while I've been sort of waffling on. Here we do have one. Angelique. I have a bright child in my class, but he struggles to spell simple words. Like no and no, as in K-N-O-W and N-O. Do they just have to learn them off by heart?
Yes and no. There are some words like no that don't behave themselves phonically. So no, as in N-O, tends to come up as one of the tricky words that we teach alongside the phonics program. But even then, we would start with, well, the is behaving itself. It's doing what we expect it to do. It's only the letter O that is being a bit odd. So there are some tricky words. Unfortunately, they tend to be the most common ones that we want the children to write, like said and was and they. That to an extent we do need to teach them to just spell them, because they will often need to spell those words before they've got the more sophisticated phonic language or phonic knowledge. Having said that, I would always, as I say, draw attention to the letters that are behaving themselves and encourage the children to have a go, because once they have a go, we can find out where the problems are and then we can get and remove them. Now, when it comes to homophones, you don't say how old your little one is. Homophones tend to come into the spelling curriculum a little bit later on because they are difficult. But with a word like know, as in K-N-O-W, this is where I would want to teach them the story behind the word. So that particular word is Germanic in origin, and in German, as I'm sure Rebecca will endorse, the K is usually pronounced as in the word like Knaben, which is little boy in German. So those words have come from us to us in English from German, but we have simply stopped pronouncing the K. But if you tell the children that, and then you support them with know and the word family, knowing and knowledge and all of that, that might help the child to distinguish when to use N-O and when to use K-N-O-W. Okay, so there are strategies that you can do, and no, I wouldn't say it is just a question of learning them all by rote, but unfortunately there are some words that we do sort of have to learn by rote, but they tend to be the little common ones, and we can play lots of games to help with that. Does that help?
Really interesting. Yeah, thank you, Amanda. It's really interesting because I was watching, like a true English person, an episode of Countdown. My husband's slightly obsessed with Countdown, so if he gets 10 minutes to relax, he puts Countdown on. And the lady who reads out the words was actually explaining on this particular episode how exactly what you talked about at the beginning, how so many words have come into the English language from outside. And she was giving lots of examples from the French. So, for example, advantage actually comes from the French avantage, but we found that as English people difficult to pronounce, so we added in the D and the derivation of these words. And I'm sure you're right that if you can give a student a story and an explanation as to where that's come from, they'll remember, because it's all about sort of association and learning, isn't it? So I'm sure there's sort of activities you could do around.
And actually, even though etymology doesn't technically come into Key Stage until Key Stage 2, at the times when I was teaching Key Stage 1, I would still tell children those stories, because it just helps to make the words a little bit more memorable. And the other thing it does is it gives them a fascination. They want to know more. And I think one of the most well-thumbed books on our shelves in the primary school that I taught, or the primary schools I taught at, were the etymological dictionaries. Because once they'd found the story of one word, they started going, oh, well, I wonder why, or I wonder how, I wonder where this word comes from. And that's really healthy, really healthy. We don't want children to be frightened of spelling. We want them to be fascinated by it. Right,
we've got some more questions here. Just bear with me, everybody, while it's very small print. I've got my glasses on. We've done that one. Lots of thank yous. Okay. Thank you, Amanda. I would like to ask, if I have a 30-minute phonics lesson, what sequence would be ideal?
Okay, well, actually, this is one of the things that we cover in the course. Review, teach, practice, apply is the teaching sequence that I would always recommend. I always say these teaching sequences should never be a straitjacket, but they are a really good guide. The review bit is really good because when we're teaching phonics, we're focusing on a new sound, but we need to keep those other sounds that they already know bubbling. So the review bit is the part where we remind the children what we've already done, particularly picking on the ones they've been finding a bit tricky. Teach them the new letter sound correspondent, the phoneme grapheme correspondent, and then give them the chance to blend and segment with practicing with that new sound and sounds they already know. The blending and segmenting is absolutely crucial, because otherwise if they're not using their sounds to blend and segment, why are we teaching them phonics? So they must blend and segment. And then the apply bit is the part where I would say, now you need to understand why we've been doing this today. This is to help you with your reading. This is to help you with your writing. So let's read something together that happens to include the new sounds we've been teaching, or let's write something together. And again, there are lots of lovely activities that we can do. We can do riddles, we can write captions for things, we can play a game called sentence substitution. There are lots of lovely things that we can do to make that apply bit fun and exciting, but nevertheless making that link into the reading and the writing they're about to go back into the classroom to do. So that's what I would always recommend, is keeping to that broad sequence. It does change a little bit as the children get older, so that you can't necessarily cover that in one, you can't cover all of those steps in one whole session. But we might cover them over a series of lessons as the phonics becomes a little bit more complicated. But that's what I would do.
Thank you, Mandy. And obviously, if you'd like to understand more about that sequence, do register for the course that's coming up. Thank you. That was from Nina. Ranjani has a question here: how to teach them soft G and hard G, for example?
Yes, again, I would go for making an analogy with soft C. It's the same sort of rule. G's are, I'm going to say, mostly, it's very hard to say always or never in English spelling or English grammar. G's are mostly soft if they're followed by an I, an E or a Y, which is exactly the same as the soft C. Unfortunately, it's not quite as reliable a tool as it is with the soft C, because of course we say give and we don't say jiv. So I mean, there are some exceptions to the rule, but generally if it's followed by an I, an E or a Y, that's when it's likely, more likely, but not always, unfortunately, but more likely to be soft. Okay.
Thank
but
you.
Link it with C. Link it with the soft C.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, hold on, I've just lost here. Okay, this is from Elaine. I have children who struggle with red words as they are told they're not allowed to sound the letters. They are 5 years old.
Okay, right, now then that tells me that you're working with Read Write Ink, because that's the scheme that has the red words.
I'm glad you Amanda, because I was struggling slightly. What's a red word?
No, red words. So the red words tend to be the tricky words, the ones that aren't necessarily phonically decodable. And the ones that we want to develop automaticity. So in other words, exactly as you say, I don't want the children to be sounding them out to read them. I want them to just be able to see them and go, oh, I know what that is, and be able to say it. Now, the problem with the sounding out is if the word is said, it does not compute to said, and that's probably the reason why you've been told not to let the children sound them out. If they are struggling with them, then I would go back to something that I said in answer to, I think, the first question, which is taking that red word, looking at the sounds that do behave themselves. So let's take the word said, for example, and say s and d are doing as we want them to. So let's just have a look at the sound in the middle and see if we can, you know, notice that it's at it, which we normally associate with the A, but this time it's saying eh. And then play lots of games around them. So if they're struggling with them, yeah, generally it's not a good idea to get them to sound them out because we're using our phonic knowledge inappropriately. Okay, if they happen to be read words that are phonically decodable, they're probably there because the children should be automatic with them by now. If they're not, obviously, then you do have to work on them a bit. I, again, hope that helps, but do come back to us if that's not a clear answer.
Thank you, Amanda. Another question here. Just one sec. I have around 4 children in a class, and while trying to blend, they are only saying the phonic sounds but are unable to blend them together. I have tried sound buttons, stretch bands, arm bending, but they seem to be struggling. What are the other strategies I can use? How can I help these children? They are 4 and 5 years old, and that's from Giselle.
Right, now the first thing I want to know is how the children are actually articulating the letters, because often that problem around blending and segmenting starts to occur when they're adding in the schwa. That's the sound. So if I give you the example milk, and I'm sounding out milk, if I say m, I, l, k, and I try to blend that, I get melika. But if I blend it using what we call the pure sounds, milk, then I can blend it to the milk to say milk. So the first thing I would say is check, are the children putting in that schwa, that sound, because that often is the problem. If it isn't that, then go back to shorter words and just work on it and build up the skill from 3-letter words to get the children to understand how they work. But just make sure that is not making an appearance, because that's usually the problem. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Another question just coming in. Sorry, one sec, bear with me. Okay, this is from Edna, and she asks, have you any recommendations or strategies for teaching spellings in context rather than through word lists and spelling tests?
First of all, more power to your elbow for teaching words in context. Yeah, the first thing I would do is look at my curriculum generally and look at where the words that I want to teach will fit into my topics. Particularly those wretched year 3, 4 and 5, 6 word lists that you have to deal with. And many of them do fit into topics, and one of the resources that you'll get if you come on the course is those word lists set out into different subject areas, which is quite handy. So the first thing I would do is look at where those links are in the topic. I would also link as many words as I can to the text that I'm using. So look for the opportunities within the text for the spelling patterns, for you know, how adjectives are formed, have a look at, for example, choosing your text to look at verb endings. So obviously if you're doing non-fiction text, you might be looking at present tense suffixes. If you're using fiction, it might be past tense suffixes. So again, that's a really good way of teaching the children how to add those appropriate suffixes. Adjectives, obviously, there are lots of lovely books as well that we can use. For example, one of the books that I use with younger children is a book called Dangerous, and it's about a little mole who loves to label things. And he comes across something he can't label one day, so instead of using a noun he has to use adjectives. So it's a great way of introducing children to how adjectives are different from nouns, by looking at their word endings, the OUS endings and the LY endings. So so yes, to summarize, look at your topics, and find and associate the words with the topics where you possibly can. Exploit the text that you're using, the good text that you're using, and look for the opportunities within that. And then when you are doing testing, test in the context of sentences or paragraphs. So read the children a sentence and ask them to write the words within those sentences, a little bit of dictation if you like, because that, you're absolutely right, that is so much more effective than just decontextualized lists. It's one of the things that David Crystal bangs on about quite a lot, not teaching children spelling through lists. So more power to your elbow. But again, if that's not a long enough answer, come back to Rebecca and perhaps we can pick up on that during the course.
Edna's saying thank you very much. Another question here, so, and lots of people saying, from Elaine saying, I love that, reader, no and no. Thank you very much. A question here, would you recommend teaching one sound per lesson? That's from Liana.
Yes. Yes, short answer is yes. 4 sounds a week if you can. Now I'm saying that advisedly. If you take the first 4 sounds that the children learn in phonics, that's usually SATP. If we've taught those 4 sounds in 1 week, then by the end of the week they can blend and segment at least half a dozen words, and it makes sense to them. If we only do 1 sound a week, it's 4 weeks before they can really do anything with them, and they'll lose the will to live in that time. So as many sounds, 4 sounds is usually what's recommended in order to get through the curriculum at an appropriate pace, and so that the children can make use of the sounds. Having said that, children who have special educational needs, or perhaps are tackling English and it's not their first language the first time, you may need to go a little slower. But that's your professional judgment, but keep on using that review section to keep those letters bubbling, and that will allow you to do a 1 GPC grapheme phoneme correspondence per day, 4 days a week, and then use your 5th day to just keep them bubbling, just keep revisiting and dealing with the ones that are causing them a few problems. Okay.
Thank you, Amanda. Right, I'm going to make this our last question. Lots of thank yous coming in. This is our last question for this afternoon. The letter Y sound sometimes gives a long vowel sound of I, depending on the syllable, like cry and happy. How to explain the words like day, play?
Right, now day and play, with day and play, the Y is part of a digraph. So it is AY is one of the graphemes for the A sound. So it's about, and again, this is something we cover quite a lot, the difference between a single sounds or single letter sounds and digraphs and trigraphs. I think with regards to day, it's about understanding that that is one of the graphemes for the A sound, and it often appears at the end of a word. But you're quite right, Y is, I tend to call it a part-time consonant and a part-time vowel. You're quite right, it can say E, I and I as well as E. Now that distinction we don't tackle until phase 5. Okay, so it's very much a phase 5 aspect of learning. So without knowing a little bit more about what's behind your question, I would say it is about teaching the children that that letter Y can represent more than one phoneme, which, as I say, is a phase 5 aspect of learning. Okay.
Brilliant. Amanda, thank you so much. You clearly have such a wealth of knowledge, and you know, the questions that are coming through, obviously very specific, very particular, but you know, you can see how much already your knowledge and experience is helping. So thank you so much for your time today. Participants, I do hope you've enjoyed it as well, and have gained much from it. I'm sure you have. We've had some great numbers. I think at one point we had 65 people here and 95 in fact registered, so it's obviously a hot topic, and we really hope to see you on Amanda's forthcoming courses, where obviously you'll get a lot more support and you know, access to Amanda herself, and all of her ideas and experience and resources. So Amanda, thank you so much again for your time. Thank you all for being with us, and we hope to see you again soon on our webinars and courses that are coming up. Take care, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, because it's 4 o'clock out there.
Yeah. That must have been a bit surreal in a way. Not having a, well, I suppose you didn't have a